The series begins with Prairie, who attempts to take her life off the bridge. In the hospital, Alice, the nurse, tries to find out who her family is, but it seems that Prairie is in a state of shock and cannot respond to her. Nancy, Prairie's adopted mother, receives a call from her friend who tells her to check the YouTube video in which Prairie is attempting suicide over the bridge. When they arrive at the hospital, the nurse tells the adoptive parents that she doesn't know anything about the scars on her body and doesn't want to talk about that, too. When they enter her room, Prairie becomes terrified of them, but Nancy approaches and calms her down. Alice inquires about what is happening, and Abel answers her that 7 years ago, she disappeared and was blind. She couldn't see their faces. Alice is surprised because now she can see. They go home and are surprised when they find that there are a lot of journalists present to know Prairie's miraculous story and how she could see after she lost her eyesight. She covers herself with a sheet and enters her home, where she finally gets laid in bed. But she's disturbed by the situation that she's put in. The policeman asks her about what has happened. She says that she was walking for a few days when an old woman drove her to a shelter because she did not know where else she could go. She says that she has died several times before. Everyone is surprised at what she is saying. The investigator knows that Prairie is lying, and there is a secret she's not telling them about. At night, Prairie Googles a person named Homer, but she discovers that she has forgotten the password. She searches for it everywhere and doesn't find it around. She finds a camera with videos of her when she was little. Her mother comes in and says that she too cannot sleep like her. They both go outside and have a walk together. In the morning, Prairie records herself talking in a video to Homer. She says that she misses him and that she wants him to reply to her, but her mom comes in. Prairie asks her for the Wi-Fi password. She responds that the psychiatrist said she should stay away from the outer world at present. So, Prairie sneaks outside the house and goes to where some boys gather. They are buying the drugs from Steve, who sees her and takes the camera from her. He thinks that she is filming him. She tells him that she wants him to help her with the internet password, but Steve becomes violent. When she tries to retrieve her camera, he releases his dog, which bites her hand. She bites the dog, that stops and calms down completely. Steve becomes surprised with what is happening in front of him. She takes the camera from his hand. At home, her mother treats the dog biting, and once she calls her Prairie, she becomes upset and says that her name is OA. The mother is surprised by what she says. She tells her that she understands what her daughter has gone through and that she just wants to help her. At school, Steve sees a boy named Miles singing. He's admiring him. Outside school, Steve tries to get to know him, but Miles says that he doesn't want to get to know someone who treats his friend aggressively. Upon hearing this, Steve hits him severely. After that, Steve goes to Prairie, and from the window he gives her the internet device and teaches her how to operate it. But in return, he wants her to help him not to be expelled from school. He prefers not to tell this family. Prairie agrees, but under certain conditions. She tells him that she needs people like him to help her with something that she's up to. After that, they go shopping together to buy her clothes. She gets her hair done like a mother. She goes to school and addresses the headmistress, Elizabeth. Prairie, disguised as Steve's mother, tells her that he needs her help and that she will become a good teacher when she can teach students with difficulties, and not only good students. She must guide him. Even though she doesn't like Prairie interfering in her work as a teacher, she accepts her words and agrees not to expel Steve from school. When Prairie goes back home, she talks to Steve, who thanks her for her help, but she says that she wants 5 people from his side. He tells her that he has fulfilled his promise, as she has helped him in exchange for his help. In a supermarket, Elizabeth meets Steve's father. She tells him that his wife is a good and conscientious person. Meanwhile, Steve's real mother comes. Elizabeth discovers that it's one of Steve's games. At home, Steve's parents meet Prairie's parents. They tell them what their daughter did and that she needs help. Here, she uses the camera and records only her eye in a video asking for 5 people to help her with something, and to meet her in the abandoned house at the beginning of the road. Then she uploads it on YouTube. During the night, Prairie runs away to the abandoned house. Then, shortly after, Steve arrives with 3 more people, French, Buck, and Jesse. These people have watched the video, but Prairie wants one more to complete the number. At this time, Elizabeth, the school principal who has watched the video, joins them for help. Prairie asks them to close their eyes and imagine what she is going to tell them. Let's go back in time to when Prairie was a little girl who was born in Russia in 1987, where her name was Nina. She belonged to an affluent family. Her father was the owner of a mining company. He could extract precious stones and valuable minerals. They lived in a rich province on Moscow's outskirts. At that time, those who had money and were rich had to pay the Russian forces. Prairie wasn't born blind. Her mother died during childbirth. She lived with her father in a palace, and every night she would have dreams that looked like real life. Her father used to reassure her every time. One day, while she was riding the school bus, the Void Forces deliberately caused their bus to have an accident. The bus sinks into the waters and all the students, including Prairie, die. There, a woman named Katun asked her if she wanted to return to life. She responds with a yes. Katun says that she will return to life, but without her eyesight. Indeed, Prairie finds herself by the sea with her father, but she cannot see anything. After that, her father decides to smuggle her to America and enroll her in a boarding school for the blind. Even though she spoke to her father daily and played violin for him, she felt lonely and far away from him. A day comes when she goes to the school principal's office and finds her aunt telling her that her father has died. In shock, Prairie couldn't believe what she heard, and because it was her aunt who became her guardian, she had to take her. One day, the aunt offered her friend's baby for adoption for money. The family that wanted to adopt the baby was Nancy and her husband, Abel. When Nancy hears the baby crying, she checks on her and finds Prairie next to her trying to pacify her. Nancy admires her very much and asks her aunt and Abel if she can take the little girl instead of the baby. The aunt agrees because they will provide her with a better life than what she provides for her. But she is afraid that anyone will know that she left her niece to them. Abel decides to change her name and identity, and from that day on, her name becomes Prairie. Abel films her on videos every night because they sense strange behavior. They visit a psychiatrist to present her case, who says that she suffers from a serious mental illness. She has been taking sedative medications for 13 years, but the pills did not help her condition as much. One day, she runs away from her home to the place where she has seen her father in a dream. She waits all day, but he doesn't come as he promised her in the dream. To the present time, where Prairie apologizes to her parents for leaving the house without asking permission. She wants to inhale fresh air, but Nancy tells her that this is of no use to her. Unlike Nancy, Abel agrees for Prairie to go out even for 1 hour in the fresh air, as it is beneficial for her mental health. The next day at school, Jesse, Steve, and Buck decide to search about Prairie, but they do not find anything under Nina's name. French passes by them, acting arrogant, and Steve becomes annoyed with him. Buck meets French during the night as he is leaving the supermarket. She tells him that her family hopes that she is as intelligent as him and excels in her studies. She tries to convince him to return to their meetings with Prairie. He tells her that the abandoned house where they meet Prairie is where Steve sells drugs. If they are arrested, his future will be ruined. Buck says that she is curious about Prairie's life, especially since they are an ordinary people. He interrupts her saying that he is special and that he doesn't need such things in his life. So he leaves, but suddenly he changes his mind and calls on Buck to go to that house to meet the others. There, they find everyone waiting for them, and Prairie carries on her story. In the past, when Prairie plays the violin at the train station, Dr. Hunter, who admired her skill very much, Asked if anything had happened in her life that made her play skillfully, she is surprised by his question and wants to leave. But suddenly, he asks her whether she died, and then comes back again. He takes her to the restaurant and tells her that the same thing happened to him. He heard a roaring sound that had no explanation and decided to study this rare experience he went through. He calls it a near-death experiment. He says that anyone who dies must have gone to a specific place. He is curious about it. He says he has studied the cases of many who have come back from the dead. They have returned differently, some of whom returned with superior mental abilities. He takes out a device from his bag with headphones that can detect a person's heartbeat. Prairie asks him at this moment to take her with him to study her condition. When they arrive at Dr. Hunter's house, she asks him to call her family to reassure them that she's well. But no one answers her. Then Dr. Hunter takes her to the basement. He has designed it in the form of a glass cage. He takes Prairie inside the cage and locks her inside. She becomes shocked by what happened and hears Hunter saying that she will find her freedom in her dreams. To the present time, where Prairie is crying, then leaves everyone and runs away. She becomes awake all night long and unable to sleep. In the supermarket, Nancy is bumped into a journalist, Beth, who says that she has solved similar cases of her daughter, Prairie. However, Nancy doesn't want to talk to her, but she convinces her saying that she can help her. She gives her her card in case she changes her mind. At night, Nancy invites Beth over for dinner. Beth tells them about Jamie, the child about whom she wrote a book, and that he was kidnapped, as happened with Prairie. She laughs and says that she won't be able to give her any story because Jamie's story is different from hers. His story has an end, while hers is yet to begin, and everyone is surprised by what she's saying. We return to the time in the past when Prairie discovers that she is not alone in the cage, but that there are people like her trapped inside. Hunter takes her out of the cage to upstairs so she can feel the air and the sun, the freedom. Prairie finds a knife and bread next to it. She makes a sandwich for Hunter, who likes it, and asks her to make the same for the rest. She gets to know a person named Homer, who tells her his story. That Hunter laughed at him and gave him $500 in exchange for experimenting on him. He locked him inside the cage. Homer says that he needed the money for his son. He asks her to send a letter by mail or to communicate with his wife to help him. Prairie says that she's blind. She can't do that on her own. Every night, Hunter gets Prairie to be with him and shows her that he needs pills to help him sleep because he suffers from insomnia. And while she is doing house chores, she thinks that she should put sleeping pills in Hunter's food. Suddenly, while he is eating, he starts to cut off sharply. He asks whether she has put tomatoes in the food because he's allergic to them. She replies that she has put a bit in the food. And he finds that he's run out of his injection. He asks her to bring more from the bathroom, where he must have a stock. He warned her that if she did something wrong, then nobody's able to free the rest in the basement. She is forced to bring the syringe, but when the serum falls into the bathtub, she feels a dead woman's body named August. Hunter finds her in a shocked state. He takes the syringe and serum from her, then tells her that this girl died before her arrival here. Prairie goes back to the cage in the basement. She asks everyone to write down the help they want. If she gets out, she will send them by mail. She puts Homer's ring in a bag and passes it to him from under the cage through stream of the water. He writes a letter to the police and the FBI. Then he returns the letter via water, but unfortunately, the current takes the bag away from Prairie. She loses her only hope of escaping from this place. She cries a lot, but Homer calms her down and tells her to jump to expel all the negative feelings outside. To ease their despair, each one of them tells an incident that happened to them in the past. The next day, Prairie asks Hunter how August died, but he refuses to tell her anything. Suddenly, she pushes him against the wall, and he falls unconscious. Then she breaks the window with a kitchen utensil to run away, but Hunter gets her in his grasp once again. She is in the same place where she met Catan when she was a child. The woman gives her the choice between swallowing a dove and returning to her father where they live in peace far from the problems. But Prairie chooses to go back to the people who were locked in the cage and save them. So she swallows the dove. When she wakes up, she sees Hunter next to her, treating her, who is thinking about how she did all this while she is blind. He gets her back to her cage in the basement. There, Homer seems worried about her, in contrast to him. Scott, who seems upset that their plans to escape have failed for the second time. But Prairie laughs and says that she can see now. Returning to the present time, we see that everyone is touched by her story and what she endured. As for Nancy, she tells Abel that she is thinking about returning to her work to pay for Prairie's university expenses in case she thinks about pursuing education, or the costs of surgeries for the scars on her back. As for Prairie, she is with the psychiatrist, who tells her that she can trust him and tell him her story. And in this case, he will help her, but if she wants to go, she is free, as he will not pressure her into anything. During the night, she returns to the deserted place to complete her story, and there she finds that everyone is waiting for her. Back in time, Prairie is in the cage, and she is thinking of another plan to escape, but Scott opposes her, saying that he doesn't want to put his life in danger again. Meanwhile, Hunter comes and takes her for an experiment and plants a microphone in her to find out what will happen to her when she approaches death. He tells her that she is special and different from the rest. He asks her when he hit her on the head, what exactly did she feel or see? Because she was almost dead, as if she came back from death. She tells him that she did not feel or see anything. Hunter knows at this moment that she doesn't want to help him with his experiments. However, he investigates what exactly she saw. Prairie gets nervous. She doesn't want to tell him about Catan, but she says that she saw her father, and yet she chose to return to this life. Hunter is confused. He asks her how she prefers to return to this life rather than stay with her father. But she doesn't explain much to him, and then he takes her back to the cage. She tells Homer, Scott, and Rachel that Hunter must be spraying a gas that makes them sleep and forget some of the events that happened to them. She asks them to inhale the gas in her cage when he sprays that gas. Scott doesn't agree with that. He shows Prairie the scars on his body. He says that he doesn't want to be subjected to the same torture again. And unlike him, Homer and Richie are ready to help her. When Hunter sprays gas, her plan fails, and she, Homer, and Richie faint. The only one who is not exposed to the gas is Scott. Hunter takes Homer. Scott tries to wake up Prairie, but surprisingly, he learns that the effect of the gas is not to make them lose consciousness, but rather to make them completely obedient to orders. He understands this because she obeys his orders like a robot. Days and months pass by as they try to make their plan successful, until after a year when they succeed in inhaling gas from Homer's cage. Homer is fully conscious. He's taken to the experiment room. He appears nervous when he sees all the devices and tools in front of him. Hunter forces him to inhale the gas and then returns him to his cage. And Prairie knows that they've failed once again. 3 years have passed. They tried, but their attempts failed every time. But Homer was persistent and determined to follow through with the success of his plan. One time, the plan succeeds, and Homer is still conscious. There, Hunter leaves the room. Homer takes advantage of the opportunity and checks the recordings of the experiments that Hunter is conducting on them. He becomes surprised when he learns that Hunter stops their hearts and then restarts them again. This is to record the moment the pulse stops what happens to the human mind. He learns that Hunter is obsessed with scientific explanations and discoveries. When Homer feels that Hunter is returning, he runs to connect himself to the devices. He pretends that he has fallen to the ground accidentally. When Hunter finds him on the ground, he makes him inhale the gas once again. Then after that, Homer tells his friends about what has happened to him. Prairie suggests that if he dies once again, he must eat any creature that comes near him. The next time, He finds himself in the bathroom with an aquarium in front of him. He swallows a fish. When he returns to his cage, he tells Prairie what has happened to him. She asks if he saw Katen. He replies that he didn't see anyone, and he becomes silent. But what happens is that convulsions occur and his condition worsens, whereupon Scott loses his mind. He screams so might be someone hears him. In a while, Homer says that there is no one to save them. On the surveillance cameras, Hunter notices that those in the cage are making strange movements. So he looks up to them and asks what they are doing. But no one answers him, because they have agreed to make these movements so that Hunter would feel that his experiments have failed. Suddenly, Richie screams and the others follow her. A policeman comes to check what causes the noise. Hunter distracts him and says that this noise is the song he's listening to. The policeman tells him that he suffers from his wife's illness and that she is almost paralyzed. Hunter says that her cure is hard at this stage of her illness. Back in the present time, where Prairie is with the psychiatrist, she has told him everything. He tells her that she can report to the federal police to rescue her friends. They must know the reason behind the scars on her back. And French hears his mother's voice while he's at the school's event that's held for the outstanding students. He goes outside to find his mother is wasted. She speaks loudly with one of his friend's father. He becomes upset from her irresponsible behavior, and that she doesn't care about his achievements or what is happening in his life. He goes to the same secluded house for him to meet Prairie and hear the rest of her story. We go back to the past, where Hunter is with Homer in the plane. Homer is trying to jump off the plane, and Hunter says that if he wants to kill them, he will kill all of his friends. Upon hearing that, Homer retreats. They arrive at the hotel. While he is showering, Homer takes advantage of the situation and removes the microphone that Hunter has put on his clothes. He gets down to the receptionist and asks her to call the police. He is terrified when he finds people surrounding him with weird looks. He discovers that the receptionist is not calling the police, but when he escapes from the hotel, he finds Hunter in front of him. He tells him that he told everyone that he has a son who is mentally ill and imagines strange things. They go to a restaurant where they find a woman named Renata. Hunter asks him to invite her to his room. Homer invites her and Hunter plants eavesdropping devices and cameras in his room to watch what they'll do. And the next day, Renata is found in the cage. She collapses and accuses Homer of being a scoundrel. Hunter carries on his experiments, but this time on Scott, who seems to be completely desperate. He tells him about Prairie's secret that she can see since he hit her on the head. Hunter is shocked by what he hears and forgets to shut down the device where he's experimenting on Scott. He dies. Hunter takes him back to the cage, and there he tells Prairie that she is the reason for Scott's death. She collapses when she sees him in this condition. Homer and Prairie make some kind of bizarre gestures like rituals they had seen while they were dead. Suddenly, Scott opens his eyes and says that everything Prairie told them was true, and he saw the same gestures. They need 5 moves. To the present time, where Prairie says that she needs 5 people to perform these 5 gestures to help her friends who are locked in the cage and release them. In this way, a portal will open in the other dimension, and they'll be able to pass through it. At her home, Buck tries the moves with her hands. Then she meets with the others and continues training with them. There, Prairie tells them that Renata has experienced the same that happened to her, Homer, and Scott. She saw her gesture. In this way, they have 4 moves. They have been practicing the moves for 4 years because every time they travel through the portal, they come back having forgotten everything. They decided that these moves must be documented so that they would not repeat them. She pointed out the scars on her back, saying that they are not ordinary. They needed to engrave these moves on their bodies. Jesse asks her what the portal looks like, and if they enter it, what will happen to them. She says that she doesn't know what it looks like. Because of Hunter's presence, they couldn't know, who used to watch them for 24 hours. Rachel doesn't even know anything about her move. And back to the past, where Hunter is with his friend Lionel in the hospital. Like Hunter, he's obsessed with what happens after death, who says that he is close to his theories. But Hunter tells him that he has discovered other dimensions that the human can transfer to. Lionel believes that everyone has the same path, and Hunter says that he doesn't care about profits or fame. He is just obsessed with what is going to happen, especially since he's getting closer to the truth. Lionel says that he will show him something exciting in the morgue. There, Lionel threatens him with gunpoint, saying that he wants to know through his experiments where these people go. Hunter kills him in the morgue, and then escapes in disguise from the hospital. Then he conducts his experiments on Prairie and connects her to the same device that Homer and Scott were connected to. She finds herself in the same world. When she calls for Catton, she doesn't appear. After that, she returns to the real world, and Hunter asks her what she saw. She replies that if he wants to know what is in the other world, he must experiment on himself. In the cage, Prairie feels despair and frustration, but Homer tries to lift her spirits and says that they will succeed one day. During the nighttime, Hunter sleeps with headphones on. He doesn't hear the policeman's knocks. When he sees on the surveillance cameras that there are people locked in the cage, the policeman points a gun at Hunter's head. We return to the present time, where Prairie screams from the nightmare. Abel calms her down. On the following day, in her session with the psychiatrist, she tells him about the disturbing dreams she had when she was little. She failed to know what they were. She mentions to him that among these dreams she was drowning, and she drowned in the bus accident from the bridge. She dreamed of the place where she would find her father, but she did not see him there. The next day, everyone gathers in the same meeting place to practice the moves. Each one is focused on their moves and helps the other to do the necessary work. They need to perfect the whole picture. But when Steve returns home, he finds that people from the rehabilitation center have come to take him. At this time, Elizabeth is passing in front of the house and sees what is happening. She decides to follow the car until it stops at the gas station. There, they stop in the supermarket to buy stuff. She also enters to help Steve, but her plan goes wrong. Elizabeth decides to bribe the rehabilitation staff to leave Steve. They agree to take the money and leave him. As for Prairie, she is in the restaurant with Nancy and Abel. Suddenly, one of the girls who lives nearby asks her for a picture with her. Prairie gets disturbed, and then Abel calls the waiter, who is French. Nancy cries and says that she cannot protect her properly. Prairie responds that the scars on her back are not normal, but rather symbols of specific moves of going through another dimension. Nancy slaps her in the face to bring her back from the nonsense she's blabbing about, a shock that forces her to leave the place with French without saying a word. French tells her that Nancy and Abel are doing this because they are worried about her. When they reach their usual meeting place, they hear Steve's voice as he speaks loudly and screams because of what happened to him. He says that she is crazy like the rest of the people. Prairie hugs him to calm him down when he stabs her with a pointy pen, but she's still holding him in her arms. Then she carries on her story. Back in the past, when the policeman is up to arrest Hunter, who says that he is conducting some experiments for the good of humanity, the policeman doesn't buy it. He locks him in his car and then brings his sick wife. He asks those in the cage who can cure her. Hunter releases Homer and Prairie and asks them to treat the sick woman. They leave them with the sick woman and watch what is happening through the cameras. Here, the two of them, Homer and Prairie, perform those rituals, and suddenly the electricity goes out. Hunter operates thermal cameras. At this moment, the woman grabs Prairie's wrist and tells her that she was waiting for this moment with bated breath. She says that when she was little, she was swimming and drowned. When she met a little girl who told her that she'd meet them and that she'd help them, she tells them that she'll perform the fifth move. At this moment, the policeman comes and hugs his wife. Unfortunately, Hunter shoots them both to death. He locks Homer in the closet and takes Prairie with him after he injects her with what makes her lose consciousness. Then he throws her on the side of the road and tells her that he doesn't need her anymore, especially after he knows the fifth move. At present, Prairie has collapsed as she tells what happened, and here comes Nancy and Abel, who take her to the hotel. Because the press chases them everywhere to take pictures of Prairie and her news. Here, Nancy admits to her husband that she knew that Prairie didn't disappear. She left a message for them saying that she would meet her father and return. Abel becomes upset with what he's hearing from his wife. He leaves her alone. Nancy follows him and justifies her position, but he replies that it is enough that she lied to him and the police. She was supposed to tell him the truth so that they could make a decision together, whether they tell the police or not. Meanwhile, French and Steve are up to searching online for anything about the people Prairie was talking about, but they find Prairie playing violin at the subway. French decides to go to her house to look at her stuff. He finds a cartoon box in which all the books talk about death and what happens after it. Among the books is one written by an author named Homer. He's shocked. He takes the books and shows them to the rest of his friends and tells them that Prairie was lying all the time, and all that she told were tales and stories by the writer Homer. Time passes by. We know that Prairie has started the lessons in creative writing. She is being treated psychologically and is under house arrest. Suddenly, one day, she has a dream. At this moment, an attack occurs at school by a malicious person who fires shots in the air. The students become terrified. French and the rest do the moves that Prairie taught them to distract the man, and the police arrest him. But they find Prairie shot outside the school. When they approach her, she tells them that they have succeeded and that the portal is open now. After that, Prairie sees herself in an unusual place. She calls on Homer, and the first season comes to an end.